So I think we start this panel with some great expectations because I think YB Hana Yo this morning earlier was so inspirational and encouraging in terms of the need, the urgency, the reason why mental health is so important and why we need to sort of look at supporting it, funding it, talking about it more than anything else. Dr. Birla and I were just talking at the break. If you were at the AVPN conference last year, similarly we had a plenary session on mental health, and it was the first time that we at AVPN had talked about mental health, and you know, we were determined to do something about it. So I'm extremely glad to welcome her back as we have launched our first pooled philanthropic fund focused on mental health and well-being for youth. The pandemic, which we're just getting out of, has been hard on all of us. It's been hard on various sections of society, but I think one of the biggest tolls it's taken has been on mental health. And through the work that each one of you do, which is what I would like you to quickly introduce, and then answer the question in terms of where do you see 2 points, the greatest gap and the biggest opportunity with regards to mental health, and how can we support, solve for it in your different markets. We have a very, very interesting panel that actually is tracing the geography of our pooled fund. We have Anwar from Malaysia, from Yayasan Hassana, as you can see from the beautiful batik shirt that he's wearing. We have Nick, who's on the board of Binjai Foundation in Singapore, but he is here in his capacity as actually someone who's working in the field of mental health. And then we have Dr. Birla here from India, talking about her work in supporting different organizations. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Birla, first, tell us a little bit about your organization, and then what do you see as the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Naina, for inviting me here. Like you very rightly said, that a year ago, we just started conversations on mental health. And at that point, Naina had said that, next year, let's launch a fund. And at that point, I had thought that, of course, I didn't tell her then. I said that, in a year from being in a place where mental health is not spoken about at all, and to move the needle so sharply to actually launching a fund in a year, I think it may not be possible. But obviously, I'm happy to have been proved wrong, and Naina has actually launched this fund, and so big round of applause to her for that. I do know, and that is one of the biggest gaps, I do know that collecting funds and having philanthropists or CSR corporates actually donate towards mental health is a huge challenge. And I think that is a huge gap that exists, because I do believe that mental health is very, very underrated, it's very underserved, and it's very underfunded. Primarily the reason being because A, it is not tangible, so you do not see, firstly, you don't understand what you're suffering and whether you're suffering or not. And secondly, because it is intangible, it's not quantifiable and you can't measure it. So very often the return to investment may take very long, and also you don't see it happening. You can't quantify it, right? You can't say that I've built X number of toilets, for example, or I've built an X number of schools, or I have educated so many girls or boys. You can't say that. It's the change that you see is at a behavioral level, it's at a systemic level. You will see changes in symptoms, but it's very difficult to quantify. And because of that, you don't see too much funding coming, because then the question is asked that, what's your return on investment? How soon are you going to see return on it? Obviously, the lead period is very long, turnaround time is very long. So also that, people become impatient when you're putting your fund towards something like that. So that is a huge gap there, but obviously the opportunity is also there, because then if you do put your funds into that, it is something that is really going to have a massive impact, because mental health is something that runs across the basic landscape. It's a thread that really goes across everything. Negative mental health and everything is just down the drain. So while it is a gap, it is also a huge opportunity. The other big gap that I see in mental health is a lack of awareness. And when I say lack of awareness, that arises from the stigma, which of course is embedded in huge cultural differences, your mental makeup, the kind of society and background you're coming from. There is a lot of stigma attached to it. But there is also lack of awareness because of ignorance. You genuinely don't know a lot about mental health because of the lack of education around it. You very often don't know you're suffering from it. And even if you know you're suffering from it, you don't know what to do and how to go about actually addressing it. So that lack of awareness is a huge gap. And that again is a very big opportunity, because if we are able to create awareness at a public level, if we are able to bring about mental health literacy, I think that in itself will go about increasing help-seeking behavior. So predominantly, the gap is in the awareness, in the funding, and the lack of availability of accessible services and affordability. So because the gap is there, but there's also that much opportunity in actually serving it and making it grow.
Absolutely. Where there is a gap, there is opportunity and the opportunity to serve. Anwar, I'm going to go to you next and ask you the same question. Firstly, in Malaysia, what have you seen? And where does YH see gaps, and what are you doing to fill those gaps?
Thank you, Nena. Firstly, for inviting Hasana to be on this panel and also having mental health as an agenda in AVPN. So for Hasana, we have been working in the area of mental health over the past few years. But what we started off with is capacity building for the counselors, something that we are still doing. But as the years go by, we learn more on the needs in the space, and I'd like to echo Nirja on addressing the stigma and lack of awareness, especially among youth. This is especially true because youth is at an age, in Malaysia at least, they can't reach out and obtain support on their own. They still need to get the consent from the parents. Even if they call the hotlines, the people manning the hotlines would have to ask for parental consent for the youth. And in speaking to our partners as well, they see that the youth, this age group, anywhere between, if you're talking about schools, 14 to 18, this is the most crucial age and most difficult to reach out because they have their own minds. Some of them, they may not be aware that they are facing mental health issues. When we speak to students, Nina, what they tell us is that they see their peers going through changes. They see their peers losing interest in learning, become loners, starting to, substance abuse. They start to cut themselves. And it's not only boys, but even girls. And some say you don't see it in girls, but when we ask the girls, yes, it happens, and it's very often under their hijab, behind their ears. So it is serious, it is, and let me just share just one statistics. Between 2020 and May of 2021, in Malaysia, there were 1,708 suicide cases. And these are cases that are reported to the Royal Malaysia Police. This is not hearsay, this is not research. These are actual cases. And from the 1,708 cases, about 50% are those ages 15 to 18. And this is one of the many reasons why we have to focus on this age group. We have to focus on the youth. And we're not talking about ideation. We're not talking about attempting something. Ideation, more girls may think of, committing suicide. But those who attempt are more boys. So this is an age that we need to educate our youth especially those who are in school, especially in this particular age group, because many a times they are not able to reach out, and they don't know themselves what are they going through, what's depression, what's anxiety. But the thing is that with mental health, it is real, it is common, it is treatable. That's the sad case. Before it escalates to a point when they have to go to see clinical psychologists, it can be treated at the stem, only if we have the services for them. And the services is still lacking in the country. We don't have enough.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more at the fact, I mean, when you said it hadn't even struck me that if you're below the age of 18, you need the consent of your parents. And for all of us who live in this geography, sometimes that is actually really hard to do because we don't talk about it. We have this stigma. You said it's common. I couldn't agree with you more. If we even did a poll of all the people sitting in this room, we would either know someone who's in our family, we would know a friend, we would know a colleague, we would have somebody that we know who has been struggling with mental health. And I really appreciate the fact that you said it's treatable. This is not a lifelong stigma, and we have to talk about it. And that is a lovely segue to ask you, Nick, because you do work very closely with those who are struggling. And tell us a little bit about what you do and where you have seen opportunities and challenges.
Okay. I wear two hats today. I'm part of Binjai Tree. So that's the foundation that supports arts and culture, education, mental health is one of the big things that we all do at Binjai Tree. In my real full-time job, I'm the Executive Director of Resilience Collective. So Resilience Collective is a mental health charity, mental health agency. We are in the business of providing peer support for people with mental health conditions. So we meet people with mental health conditions regularly, and we have very structured support groups for them. Okay, so they come to us. We have a group of up to 15 people per session, and it's a regular group. It's a closed group, so that provides for trust and safety for conversations, authentic conversations on mental health, their well-being, how they are doing in the course of their recovery. So that's the main thing that we do at Resilience Collective. Of course, we've got other things such as workshops, psycho-ed, and also we allow them to go and share their own lived experiences, right? So I think that's really powerful for them. The gap that I see, or I think there is this huge gap between awareness and education, right? So I think in Singapore, there's a lot of awareness about mental health conditions. COVID has helped the whole world be aware of mental health conditions. So if you ask anyone on the street, I think people would say, yeah, I know that there's this mental health thing going on. I know that there are people with mental health conditions, right? So the problem is, if there's awareness, then what are they doing about it, right? Because stigma is still a huge problem in Singapore. There are a lot of people who come into our sessions and they would say, oh, okay, if I know that person, if I know someone within the group, I wouldn't want to be in that group because I'm concerned that people know about me having a condition. And when we do social media posts, we're very careful about posting pictures and photographs about of our attendees because stigma is still real. And stigma is never, mental health conditions are almost never talked about at the workplace, right? So that's the other big gap, I feel. In Singapore, mental health support in the workplace is sorely lacking, I'm sorry, right? Because of the work that I do at Resilience Collective, a few large companies have reached out for me to go and meet with them. And it's always HR, right? And the problem with HR talking about these issues and the problem with you wanting to share your mental health problem with an HR person is that you're concerned whether you'll be marked, right? So that's a real problem. And I've been speaking with some of them, several sessions, just to talk about that alone, right? That HR, you need to be very careful about how you approach that colleague with the mental health condition. So there's this particular company, someone did something, was sent to hospital, and then was discharged, right? Her colleagues knew about it, but they didn't dare to tell HR because they were very afraid, that HR would put a mark on that person's record. Performance, career potentials are very much affected, perceived to be affected, right? What they don't know is that potentially some companies are actually putting things in place to help them.
It's really interesting, and I'm actually going to put all three of you on the spot because you three come from three different countries. The countries are different in terms of size, in terms of economic prosperity, but I think, what you're saying is it runs across all three countries. So I'm going to share some statistics on India. Before the pandemic, 1 in 7 people in India actually suffered from some sort of mental health issue. In 2022, the WHO reported that India has one of the world's largest populations with mental issues. Obviously, it has now the largest population in the world, but still, with the kind of misinformation, Neerja, and the lack of mental health professionals that are there to address these issues, what do you think it will take for a country like India to actually overcome such an immense challenge?
So, the global standard is 3 skilled mental health practitioners per 100,000 people. And of course, India is decades away from it. We can never catch up. It's just not possible. So, the number of counselors is way less. Number of psychiatrists is way less. So instead, of course, that's a huge gap that one needs to fill. But what I believe in, which is what we are doing at Empower, is that creating a more of a fellow program. Also, what we're doing is that in each of our communities, we're actually training people and upping their mental health literacy. So, for example, if we're working in schools, we are actually training the teachers to become the first point of contact. If we're working with the police, we're actually training the police managers and the personnel to become the first point of contact, and so on and so forth. As a result of which, for example, in schools, if the teachers become the first point of contact and they are able to at least identify the children who could have potential issues, they kind of become the filter. They are able to identify them, and then the counselor comes into play and is able to then deploy and give the mental health. The actual work that needs to be done by the counselors can be done. So by doing that, we're actually expanding the workforce and not limiting it only to psychologists and psychiatrists. We're creating a first whole tier of first point of contact, like mental health first aiders or mental health champions. So by doing that, we're actually reducing the load and the burden on the mental health practitioners. And that's the only way that we can create a network, because of course, creating more for colleges to create more programs, to actually build institutes is also the way for it. But that in itself is going to take very long, and which I don't think we have the luxury of time on our side. So why not just expand our workforce, create more volunteers, create more fellows. At the government level, at the rural district health hospital, we're creating more screening camps. So, and the volunteers can be trained to actually even conduct awareness workshops. The ASHA workers, the social medical workers can be trained to conduct workshops. So just expanding the workforce is what we're really trying to do in every community that we are working.
That's really interesting, and Nick, that speaks to you as well, because you're using peer support to become counselors, and I found that really, really interesting. Can you just tell us, like you shared with me, but share, I think, with our audience here, a little bit more about the resilience program, and how do peers end up then supporting people who have gone through this journey themselves? How do they then end up being sources of support for others?
Someone a person with a mental health condition signs up with Resilience Collective to join an information session to find out more about the program we run. So we call them Circles of Resilience. So these are our peer support groups. Within the groups, we have facilitators, and currently these are staff. but our idea is to really not have the staff facilitate. So we're actually doing training for our peer members already. Peer members are then empowered to run sessions on their own together with other members of that group. And I think that's very powerful because nothing speaks to a peer than another peer, herself or himself. Someone who has gone through the process, has faced these challenges and difficulties. They understand how difficult it can be, or not just how difficult, but how unexplainable it can be. I think all of you wouldn't know. I am a person in recovery. I went through 2020, 2021, and a good part of 2022 with depression, and I was diagnosed with major depression. Suicidal thoughts are easy to come by for me, and I was on medication. I'm happy to say that I am off medication since the late of last year, and I am very conscious of what I do, how I behave, what I think, the people I meet, and how I regulate myself, right? So these are things that when I attend some of the sessions, I have the privilege of sharing with them what works for me, what doesn't work for me. And in those days of darkness, you know, one of our mission, our vision statement, right, is to have peers live authentic lives and to thrive. When I say, when I'm asked, what is thriving to you, Nick, right? I used to say getting out of bed is thriving, because there are days that I just wake up and why am I awake? Why am I here? And I just want to stay in bed all day long, you know. So I think that's tough, and many of them are going through this right now, right? So no amount of counseling sometimes will help, because they will just think that, oh, it's just someone without a condition, how would they know? And they're just yapping away, right? So talk therapy is tough sometimes for them to accept, but then they do ask, how did you feel? What did you do? Why are you here today? How did you get through it, right? So that's something that we believe. So we're a peer-for-peer agency. 70% of my colleagues have a certain condition. It could range from depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar, and the group that we serve, all multiple conditions, right? And we believe that, you know, when we're able to share within this group, which has multiple different types of conditions, it empowers one another to help them to think about how I can help someone else. That's super empowering.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Really, thank you. You know, so it's been my privilege and honor to actually know these people and talk to them about the work that they do. And I'm going to actually bring in the funding aspect of it, because as Nija said in the beginning, funding is a big challenge. And when I spoke to Nick, and you know, we were talking about it when I met him for the first time, and he said, we have 10 counselors. And he said, you know, we're not letting anybody else in the program because we have a waiting list and we don't have enough counselors. And I said, well, why don't you have enough counselors? And he was like, well, don't have enough budget to train. And Nija talked about why funders don't really think about funding mental health, because it's difficult to measure, it's difficult to have a time frame, it's difficult to quantify. Which is why we come to the pooled fund that was launched earlier today. And it's a pooled fund that has unrestricted funding. And it is unrestricted funding that is directed towards organizations that are actually looking at addressing these kinds of issues. So I'm going to start with you, Anwar. YH, as we've been hearing, and we are so delighted to partner with you, is you know, this is something that when Shaira and I spoke, she said this is one of the big pillars of what you're doing as part of your education work. What led you to, firstly, look at mental health, and how many other funders in Malaysia are also looking at mental health?
Okay. I think the realization that there are not many funders looking into mental health as we work in the space over the past few years. So that is, I think, one of the main reasons that we made sure that mental health is in our theory of change. So especially for schools. So we also realized that many of our CSO partners, our NGOs working on mental health, many of them, they are working out of sheer passion. Many of them have taken leave from their day jobs, spent 2-3 years working in this area of mental health. Many of them have taken pay cuts to provide their services with no medical health benefits. So we also realize that this is not right. We need to provide them the same or better opportunities and allow them to do the work that they do. Because the fact is we don't have enough counselors, we don't have enough psychologists, clinical psychologists in the space. The ratio, WHO always says it's 1 to 10,000. We are at 1 to 100,000. So in saying so, what we wanted to do at YH is to provide that opportunity for CSOs to obtain grants so that they can do their work. When I say for them to be able to do their work, they will be able to set up hotlines for youth, for example. Now we have a national hotline, Talian HEAL, which stands for Help with Empathy and Love. And over the period of the pandemic, they have received calls, almost 600 calls per day, over 200,000 in 1 year, and each call ranges between 1 to 3 hours per call. So imagine the load that these counselors have to take upon themselves. And we also, in many ways, I would say, guilty, because a lot of foundations, a lot of donors, we put very high emphasis on the program, the programmatic costs, and very often leave very little for OPEX or operational costs. Many of our CSO partners are, they deserve more. And the pool fund being unrestricted, and also this is also something new in our region, to have unrestricted fund. Last year at AVPN, I learned on trust-based giving. So this is the whole idea. We provide them with funding so that they can do their work best. But it doesn't mean that we don't track their program. It's just their program is not a deliverable to obtain the pool fund because it's unrestricted. It can be used for operational costs. It can be used for paying the utility bills, for example, and the needs of the organization, so that they in turn can hire more counselors. They can hire more volunteers. They can have their own capacity building. It is not just them going out to help, but about themselves, capacity building for the organization. So we need more of this in this country, so that we can reach out to the rural and remote places. In KL or in the bigger cities, you do have the services. What about areas like Gua Musang, for example? And mind you that stats also show that the mental health cases are more prevalent in the rural areas for Malaysia. It's 3 times more compared to urban areas. And we think that the cases are in KL. Yes, they are in KL, but they are more prevalent in rural areas and it's invisible. It's not like disability that you can see, physical disabilities. Mental health is an invisible disability. It is not seen, but it doesn't mean that it is not there.
Absolutely. Mental health is not seen, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. You talked about trust-based philanthropy, Anwar. And Nick, I want to ask you, especially because you run a social purpose organization, what does flexible funding mean to you? When someone gives you the power to decide what to do, what does that mean to you?
It means everything to us. I hear the point about programmatic funding, and it's only dedicated for the program. But you see, in many of such agencies, right, the bulk of the cost is HR. That accounts for 60–70% of the cost easily, right? And who are the people who are running the programs, developing the programs, doing evaluation? HR, my team, right? So flexible funding makes it easier for us to be creative about how we do the work, how we make sure that the work is delivered, how we evaluate outcomes, because we are also very strong on seeing that this work that we are doing is meaningful and impactful. So we've got that as well. We want to measure. So such funding is really, really helpful for us.
Anija, I want to come to you about the third piece of the pool fund that we launched together today, which is the collaboration piece. From your perspective as a grant maker, as a foundation in India, how do other grant makers perceive collaboration, especially in the area of mental health? Do they want to come together? And in a regional collaboration like this, where, I mean, I'm sitting with the three of you and thinking there's so much that you can share, you can really leverage on each other's knowledge. So what do you feel in terms of the opportunities for collaboration in India?
So the opportunity for collaboration in India is huge. I find that most people are working in silos. You know, I think a lot of it is to do with the stigma, but a lot is just to do with the fact that people just don't want to collaborate and work together. But I do believe that the only way one can scale up is to collaborate. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. And I do think that there's great opportunity because, you know, strangely, I think all of us are saying the same thing. Our cultural constructs and contexts may be different, but we all face the same issue of lack of awareness, HR costs being very high. In fact, I think that if we are also trying to create awareness, that cost also is very high. So if we can collaborate and, you know, with the different kind of skill sets that we have, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel and we sort of just multiply what we are already doing. So, but unfortunately in India, we've not yet reached the place where we really can collaborate and take it forward. I do hope that we get there soon, but we're still not there in that space. I do think that there's a great scope for working with service providers and working in PPP, because the way to scale up in India, for example, would be working with the government, because there is so much scope in rural India. And the way to do it is work with the government. So I think that combination and that tripart agreement with the philanthropists, with service providers who can actually provide solutions, and the government is a great way to collaborate.
No, absolutely. And I think this morning we really heard the willingness of the Malaysian government to really look at addressing mental health. I'm going to also ask you, while I ask the next question to my panelists, to really think of if there is something that you would like to say, to share about your own experience, or if there is a question that you would like to ask any one of them around the work that they're doing, around mental health, and you know how it's perceived in each of the three countries where they work in. Please feel free, please put up your hand and we'll make sure a mic comes to you. I have someone up there at the back. If we can get a mic across, please. Someone whose hand is up. Thank you. If you can just, yeah. I have someone coming with a...
everyone. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm Sheila Buller, and I'm with the Elevate Children Funders Group. And youth mental well-being has been absolutely one of the most up-and-coming focuses of our 25 funders that focus on child and youth rights around the world. Significant focus, particularly in India. One of the things that we found that I'd love your thoughts on in one of our latest convenings, similar to this one, was that a lot of our funders that didn't explicitly feel they were investing or making grants in mental health had some components that were targeting similar outcomes, targeting similar challenges, and what we've found to be almost as effective in our advocacy efforts to get more funding for child and youth mental health is showing the ways that it can be integrated into the existing grant-making strategies or integrated into the existing grants that are being made rather than creating a kind of new strand or new project or program or fund around it. Would love your thoughts on that, and if you're seeing openness or willingness to funders thinking about how they can incorporate mental health without necessarily like restructuring.
Understood. I'm going to start asking you that question, Anwar. I think what she's asking is, for YH, for instance, is it easier if you did talk about it as being part of your theory of change for the work that you do. So is it easier to structure mental health or mental health outcomes into an existing grant program, or, you know, have you had to create a separate vertical that actually looks at mental health issues? Did I capture that sort of what you were trying to say? Okay.
Yeah. So for YH, for education, we did create a separate vertical just to look into mental health in schools, in students, in teachers, as well as providing services for the parents. It is not just students. And when we look at students, it is not so much providing services, clinical services for them, but looking into prevention. How do we have psychological first aid for children in the primary school? How can we have psychological first aid for students at secondary schools? So the approaches are very different when we speak to younger children as opposed to those at secondary schools. And we also added components where we have parents on board. This is one of the most difficult. Our approach is that when we do have groups of students having who may be at risk of mental health, we include their parents as part of the group counseling. So parents also get sessions to talk about what they are seeing in their children, to give them more awareness on mental health. But in our community development work, it is not a vertical. In community development, we look to improve the livelihood of those marginalized communities, the lowest income groups, and we see the need for mental health intervention. So this is where, in our work with our partner, Women of Will, we designed a program where we train the mothers, the mothers in that particular community, the government housing schemes, for example, to become para-counselors. So they are not counselors, they are not able to diagnose, but they are the go-to person in that community where they can be the referral point for mental health. There's somebody in that community of 2,000 households, for example, who has some knowledge on mental health and who are able to be the first responder. So it varies. Some are verticals, some are embedded within the programs that we run.
Okay. I know we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to, yeah.
Hi, Naina. Salim Khan from the British Asian Trust. Firstly, thank you for bringing such a rich set of panelists and an absolutely engaging discussion. We heard a lot on the need on the supply side, and Dr. Birla made a very strong case on what needs to be done on the supply side and how it's really inadequate. I want to move the lens to Nick. Firstly, thank you for sharing your story, and it really is hope for a lot of people to come out and talk so openly and normalizing it. My question is to anyone from the panel, and maybe more to you, Nick. We do understand there's a need for awareness build up and a lot more awareness to be created. What is the journey from awareness to acceptance? So one is awareness. The way I'm looking at it is mental health is an issue. It's good to talk about it, etc. And you made that case saying everyone's talking about it, and you're hearing about it a lot more. And it's a good movement of the needle. What does it mean to be accepted, to say, yes, I've come out as someone who's dealing with this issue, and more from the communities who are the lowest in the rung, and more having a gender lens as well, where you say, what does it mean for a young girl to come out and say, I'm dealing with this issue, and it is accepted, like a diabetes or even a heart issue, a heart-threatening disease. People are open to talk about it, and I'm undergoing treatment. What is that journey going to look like from awareness to acceptance?
Being aware of mental health issues, that's the first step. I think the next big hurdle is education, right? For acceptance, you are either the person with the condition, or you are the loved one, caregiver, or friend of the person with the condition. Both of these groups, I think you really need education. What is the condition about? It's something that affects your brain, your mind, chemicals in the brain. It's a medical condition. It's as simple as that, right? We had this in our meeting, right, months back. She was saying, if your son or daughter broke a leg, you go to the doctor, you don't think that, oh, nothing is really wrong, right? So likewise, because this is a medical condition, so there needs to be education that this is a medical condition. And there is medication that we can take to help us feel better, to help us to regulate, right? I think there are a lot of people still in Singapore who cannot accept it, that their friend has depression. They cannot accept it that their friend talks about suicide. Because what's the point? And this is personal, because I have shared with some very good friends, and because I think they're not so aware, or they're not so educated about what this is about and what it means and how I cope with it. They say, hey, come on, no, don't think like that. It's not that easy not to think like that, Education is really important. And then how do we handle it? What does it mean now that my friend has depression? What does it mean now that my son has depression? What does it mean for me, right? I speak with a couple of mothers, because when they call up and they say, I think we want to find out more about your program, the support group, their sons refuse to come. So I spend half an hour while I'm driving to work, or half an hour while I'm driving out for a meeting, talking to different mothers and telling them, ma'am, you need to take care of yourself first, and you need to stop pestering and nagging your son to come for the groups, because if your son has refused already, right, you need to take care of yourself. And chances are they cannot accept that, So I said, I need to sit down with you in person, because they cannot accept that their son has depression or OCD, right? They cannot accept that the son does not want to seek help, right? So the son accepts it. The son doesn't want to seek help because not ready, because of stigma. But the parents cannot accept it that my son has a condition, Education, I think, is really important, right? To change mindsets, to change thinking, to have an understanding of what these are, what it means for me, what it means for my children, what it means for my friend.
I saw another hand up at the back. Can we get a mic there, please? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jalal. I come from Pakistan. and we work in Afghanistan as well. So I'll just share our approach to mental health. So it's more or less the same, but our focus is on the prevention side because we have an integrated ECD program. So we focus the first 1,000 days, and where at the prenatal stage, and then for first 1,000 days, mother and child come to the center. So mental health program is integrated at that level, so that the science says that 80% brain develops at that time. So that is the longer term journey, that how we help young children to come with stronger brains, and mothers are aware of the mental health issues right there. And then we are working in a region where suicides in a particular month of May and June is quite high. Young people just jump into the rivers. And then we had some study data analysis. So there were 2-3 things come out, because it's the mountainous region. The winter season is longer, so a natural depression comes, they don't realize. And suddenly in March, April, the natural vitamin D excesses in their body. That's the scientific team analyzed that in winter times they have a vitamin D deficiency. So we are working on that to see on trials that how this will come up, and then we identified potential risk youth in schools. And then, as you said, that to bridge the gap, what we thought is to have interventions at the systems level, the schools and the health providers. Another interesting data came out that normally people have a headache, they just go to the clinic, the nurse or even the MD, they just describe them medicines of depression pills. But they don't tell them that you have a problem, you have to seek mental health treatment. So what happens is that the dependency increase on those medicines, and those are available in every drugstore. So that's what we are working with government to change the protocols or aid in the protocols and train them, the normal medical health professionals, to have a mental health qualification as well, so that instead of hiring a lot of new counselors, you can add that. So these are some of the experiences we have, so I'm happy to share more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask a question, and then we have time for one more question. But what I would like to ask you is, as we look at it, we've talked, we've heard. Obviously, this is something that is really widespread. What do you think it will take for us to make this an urgent issue for funders? This is a funders network. We have a lot of funding organizations here, but there's obviously very few that look at funding mental health with unrestricted funding, even fewer, funding mental health with a longer time horizon, even fewer. So building capacity around mental health, very, very few. So what do you think, Neerja, and then, I'd like to hear from you.
So, theoretically, of course, I'd say that the funders need to look at the stats. Everybody knows how grave the issue is. You just need to deep dive into that and really understand what are we dealing with, to understand that, mental health is a fabric that runs across everything, and negative mental health and everything is just down the drain, whether it is productivity at office, whether it is being able to look after your families well, for ladies, all of that. For the youth, of course, it's very important because youth is the future, all of that. But I think at the core of it is your passion. How passionate do you feel that you want to make a difference? Because if you are able to make a difference in this space, believe you me, I think it'll really change the landscape of things. I'm not taking away from any other cause. I think every cause is important, but I think all of us are so deeply invested in it because we all have our personal experiences also with mental health. But I think that can really be a game changer, because I really genuinely believe that if you're not able to get out of bed, for example, how are you going to do anything? I mean, how can you even be functional? And it is for real. I think we all need to understand that mental health is for real. It's not something that we just talk about. So I think funders and philanthropists need to feel that passion. I think it needs to come from a space of wanting to give back and really wanting to make an impact in an area which cannot be seen, which cannot be quantified, and the return of it is not really measurable in the true sense of the word.
Absolutely.
I think it takes a personal experience for someone to be moved to say that mental health is something that I really want to focus on, right? Someone that they have experienced as a friend, someone in the family, someone close to them, a good friend, for example. What happened was that I shared about the work I do with one particular potential donor, right? And I thought it was a casual catch-up, right? When I shared that in my previous job I was doing this, and now I'm doing mental health work, and he's like, oh, quite interesting, right? But when I shared that, so last year I tried to take my own life because whatever. And then he was moved. And then he said, why do you do that? You know, why did you think like that? And what happened to you, right? So I said, this is depression, and this is what I'm facing, you know. And that moved him to want to find out a lot more about mental health conditions, mental health work that we are doing at Resilience Collective, and therefore that made him commit, you know, to a sizable donation, which we are very grateful for. Personal experiences like that, shared stories, right? Which is why we go and share stories, personal stories, because when I walk into this room, let's face it, right? When I walk on the stage, you wouldn't think that this guy up here has any problems. You can't tell, right? And the stats are there. In Singapore, I think it's 1 in 5 has experienced a mental health condition before.
Wow, 1 in 5. Anwar, what will it take to move funders in Malaysia?
Yeah. Firstly, let me refer back to the pandemic. During the pandemic, we had a coalition of funders that we responded to the needs of the country, whether it's oxygen tanks, whether it is PPEs, whether it is food baskets. When there is a request, we just put them in our little group, and somebody will respond. And very often than not, the assistance will be delivered to wherever and whoever that needs it. So this is something that we do see collaboration, partnerships between funders is possible, and sometimes I know perhaps me or us in Asia, we see this, we take this for granted, but it is not something that is common outside of the region. When I spoke to friends over in the UK, for example, they said it's not going to happen. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to achieve, to get funders together. So I echo Nick in terms of stories, in terms of knowledge sharing. Whenever we have brown bags or knowledge sharing sessions, extend the invitations to the funders as well, so that they too can learn and not just invite our partners into such sessions. I think this is because we need all the help to fight this war. It is a war against mental health. And for Hasana, we are also fortunate because we are part of the budget discussion in this country. Like Datuk Johan mentioned, there is a mechanism within our budget that is grant matching between the government and the private sector and Yayasan Hasana. So it is not just a grant that the government gives to us to run, but it is a matching grant that Hasana puts in some funding as well. But imagine if we could get other funders to contribute to this pool, and the government can match that. So it is a win-win situation for both.
No, absolutely. I know that time's up, but I think, this has been a really interesting panel just because we've talked about very real issues. It shouldn't take a pandemic for funders to come together. I think, Anwar, you said it really well. It's a war. These are conditions that we don't see. As Nick said really, really clearly, when he walked up on stage until he shared his story, would you have said that he was going through mental health issues? You would not have. As Dr. Birla said, this is something that affects every cause that you fund. You cannot be funding livelihoods if someone can't get out of bed to go to work. You can't be funding education if children are not really going to be able to focus in the schools. This underlies every sector that you are actually looking to fund. So if you are a funder and you say, I don't fund mental health, well, mental health underpins every cause that you fund. So we have a pooled philanthropic fund which addresses all our regions, and all of us are participating in it, and we would really, really welcome your participation. So I'm going to end with a plug. If you want to know more about the pooled philanthropic fund that is going to look at mental health in Singapore, Malaysia, and South Asia, please get in touch with any one of us on stage or with AVPN, and we'd be very, very happy to get your help and assistance. Thank you so much.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Such an important discussion. Thank you, Naina, Dr. Nirja, Dr. Anwar, and Nicholas for this insightful sharing on Asian youth mental well-being issue and how urgent more actions are needed towards the impact and how collaborative efforts can be synergized and potentially empower the target beneficiaries.
And as Naina mentioned, if any of you would like to find out more about the partnership that want to enable this Asian youth